Everyone, it's Jason. I wanted to record this podcast. I woke up this morning and the first thing I did after a cup of coffee was looked at my phone and I saw a press release from a software company announcing that they're now an AI agent company. And what's so fascinating to me, and I wanted to record a podcast on this, is I've seen this like 4 times in the last month from 4 different companies, all of them who've kind of used the word agent like it means something specific, like it means something that everyone should know about. None of them really defined it. And I think that there are people right now, business leaders, who genuinely are trying to do the right thing for their organization. After reading one of those press releases or reading something like that, and they wonder if they're falling behind. It's why I'm recording this today. And I wanted to get across this point. An agent isn't an agent isn't an agent. Everything I talk about here for the next few minutes is in service of that one sentence. Okay? An agent isn't an agent isn't an agent. Now, let's just look at some of the stats going on. And I took some notes because I wanted to try to get these right. The AI agents market is growing at nearly 50% a year, from $8 billion to over $50 billion just in the next 3 years. That's real growth. And there's real investment behind it. And the technology underneath it all is real also. The thing that's not real is the shared definition of this word agent. And that's where I want to jump into for a minute. A Swiss Army knife, I was trying to think of analogies. A Swiss Army knife has a blade. A surgeon uses a blade. Okay, both of them will cut you, but only one should. And to me, that's kind of the AI agent market right now. Every vendor has something with a blade on it, and they're all saying they've got a blade. Some of them are surgeons, some of them are Swiss Army knives. And then now it's an interesting time because it's up to us to think about which one do we use. So let's start with understanding where they all are. You don't need to understand how an agent works under the hood any more than you need to understand how an engine works in your car. What you need is a way to categorize what we're looking at, because the category tells you everything about what to expect, how we should measure it, and how much we should trust it with work. So think of it as a spectrum. At one end, pure execution. A human built the logic, mapped every step, defined every decision. The system follows that map. It's very fast, it's consistent, and has no idea what to do the moment it goes off the map. That's, to me, what a lot of us are used to. It's a workflow. Workflows have existed under different names for 30 years. RPA, which is robotic process automation, business process management, rules engines. What changed is that vendors put a language model on the front of them, so it seems a little more conversational when you tell it what it already has decided to do. Okay? That's at one end. Move a little bit further, and you get what most people call a copilot, the system that works alongside a human. It kind of provides information, drafts things, makes suggestions. The human makes every decision. The human is the surgeon. The AI is handing them instruments. It's useful, but it's not an agent. Move further still, and you reach actual agency. Actual agency is when the system gets a goal, not a script. It figures out the steps itself. It acts, looks at what happened, and adjusts when the result doesn't match what happened. The path that it takes emerges. It kind of just shows up from the reasoning rather than from the map that someone drew it. That's an agent. And then at the far end, multi-agent systems, where multiple agents collaborate and work to each other, operate across systems simultaneously at the same time. That's real and it's growing fast, but most organizations aren't yet there. An agent isn't an agent isn't an agent. Every tool on this spectrum is currently being marketed with the same word. That's what's so important when we're watching demos, when we're watching pitches, when we're looking at proposals. Is this system, and this is the question that I've been trying to help people with, is this system following a path that a human built in advance, or is it figuring it out on its own path based on the goal or the outcome I give it? If the path was pre-built, you have a workflow, regardless of how the demo looks. If the system generates its own path and reasons along the way, you're closer to a real agent. And that's what I would love, love, love for us to get to. So let's think about these things, and let's think about 3 different use cases that are out there. Okay, the first one, the employee asks a simple question. How many vacation days do I have left? The system looks up the employee record, returns a number. That path was pre-built. The answer was predefined. The employee's getting lookup logic. There's no reasoning. There's no adaptation. It's one workflow doing exactly what it should do. And by the way, that's fine. But that's called a feature and a workflow. Let's move on to case 2. A customer submits a cancellation request. Okay, we've all tried to do this where we've tried to cancel subscriptions. System classifies it as a cancellation intent. Very important word. Generates a save offer and sends it. The large language model in this case, Gen AI, made the classification. The offer was pre-written. The system never considered that this customer had contacted support 3 times in the last month, was never resolved, the customer leaves, blah, 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 blah. It's just a flow within a large language model. Still, I would say not an agent. And let's look at a case 3, a real agent. A purchase order arrives for a vendor. It has a new compliance flag, a budget code that changed mid-quarter, a delivery address in a country the standard approval chain doesn't cover. A real agent understands or perceives all 3 of these conditions, reasons with each one, takes priority, checks policies, surfaces the right information to the right human with a recommended action and reason behind it. The path wasn't pre-built. The agent figured it out. That's the difference. So are we talking about a feature and a workflow, a basic flow with a little bit of a large language model, or a real agent? Now, to understand why this definition gap matters and why I'm spending this time talking about it, you have to understand what a workflow actually was and what it was designed to solve. Something that I had a ton of work with and ton of expertise with and did a ton of work implementing at PeopleSoft. Because the thing that most vendors are shipping as agents right now are just workflows with a better front end. And I don't want to talk too much about this, but guys, the workflow era started in the early 90s. Companies had processes, processes had steps, steps had people doing them. Those were all really powerful, and those workflows were hugely effective. An approval that used to sit in someone's inbox for days happened in 45 minutes. There was a lot of value. But here's what it required. Before any of it could run, someone had to sit in a room and map out every single step, every single decision point, every branch, everything that could go wrong. If neither of them happened or things didn't happen the way they were supposed to, then let's escalate it to a person. The entire intelligence of the system lived in that map. drawn by humans before the task ever ran. And to me, you guys, that's where the trap lives. Because the world changes and the map didn't or doesn't, at least not automatically. It changed when someone noticed it was wrong. It decided to prioritize fixing it, rewrote the requirements, did more employee listening, waited for a new development cycle, reprioritize, which basically meant in most organizations, the workflow running in production today reflects old business logic, somewhere between 2 and 10 years old. The map is old, but the world has changed. And that's where we are right now in 2026. Vendors are inserting language models into those existing architectures. The model sits there, handles variable parts, conversational parts. The output looks a lot smarter, but the interface feels more natural. The demo is genuinely impressive, but guess what? The underlying map is still the same old map. We just put frosting, sorry to use this analogy again, on a moldy cake. That's not an agent. It's a workflow wearing kind of a lab coat, I guess. And here's where the architectural difference matters. A workflow says, here's the path, follow it. An agent says, here's the goal, figure out the path. That is not a very small feat. It's a completely different idea about what software is supposed to do. In workflow, the intelligence is deposited at design time by people who built it. In an agent, the intelligence is live. It's applied fresh for each situation, and it's learning. We've all seen this, you guys, where people have put in place processes. They've automated clean, fast, great completion rates. The workflow handled the standard beautifully, but the standard was probably like 60%. The other 35, 40% were situations where 2 or 3 of those things weren't anticipated. Every one of them bounced. The system didn't crash or produce an error. It just executed and sent the customer a response that really didn't make a lot of sense. The metrics looked fine, but nobody really connected the volume of the escalation to the design. And that's where a real agent works different. Okay, a real agent handles those things differently. Now, when organizations skip this distinction between a workflow and just start deploying things with agents in them, what you end up with is a ton of agents. So the average organization today is already managing 37 agents. It's growing every quarter. But most of those deployments don't have any security oversight or governance. Nobody watching, nobody accountable. And all of a sudden, agent sprawl is this thing that we used to call shadow IT. An agent isn't an agent isn't an agent. And deploying things you can't define, can't audit, and can't explain doesn't make you an agent company. It makes you a company with a governance problem dressed up as a strategy. Now, to me, this brings us to the foundation. It matters more than anything else. Technology itself amplifies whatever already exists. I've been saying this for a long time, and I'll keep saying it. If your processes are clean, your data is trustworthy, your people understand what and why they're doing things, technology makes all of that better and faster. If your processes are broken, your data's a mess, your people don't understand why they're doing things, technology makes all of that worse and faster. In most of our cases, the underlying process is stale. The data hasn't been validated, and the rules were written for a company that was half the size with half the complexity. And all of a sudden today, we're getting offered an agent that sits on top of our moldy cake. All it's going to do is hide it until someone takes that bite. So what makes an agent? There's two things, you guys, two things that separate a genuine agent from everything I've been describing. Sorry to get technical, but I want to for a second. Adaptive reasoning and memory. Adaptive reasoning and memory. And without those, you have a rule follower, but you don't have an agent. Let's take adaptive reasoning. Think about GPS, our old GPSs. I'm old, the Garmin. It calculated a route, it handed it to us. Then when we missed a turn, it tried to drag us back to the original plan. It wasn't thinking about it was 5:15 on a Friday. It wasn't restoring a plan it made before we left the driveway. It kind of was, now that I think about it, restoring the plan it made before we left. But what does modern GPS do? It does something different. It's looking at where we are right now, what's happening on every road around us, and regenerating in real time. What matters in this particular case is current reality, and it builds the route from that, freshly, every few seconds. Guys, that's adaptive reasoning. The path is emerging from the situation. I'll say it again. The path emerges from the situation. It wasn't drawn out before anything happened. It wasn't an old map. A workflow is like an old GPS. An agent is like a modern GPS. And the difference between the two becomes really, really big when all of a sudden something unexpected doesn't occur, which in today's world is constantly. Now, the second thing, memory. Something that doesn't come up in vendor demos very often, but it's something that you should be paying attention to a lot. Now, think about the difference between a contractor you hired this morning and a colleague who's been on your team for 3 years. You give them both the same task. The contractor does decent work, but needs a full briefing before it does that. They complete the task and they get a reasonable result. But next time you start completely from scratch, as if that contractor has never been there. The 3-year colleague doesn't need the briefing. They remember what happened in Q3 last year. They know this client that we work with hates bulleted summaries. They carry that context forward, and judgment compounds over time because they're not starting from zero. Experience makes them better, and that's what memory does for an agent. There are 3 layers: what the agent holds in mind during the task, what it retains from prior sessions, and the knowledge base it draws on. Most of our current enterprise agents today have knowledge base really well built, but they don't have the first two. They don't have what they hold in mind during the task, and they're missing what it's retaining from prior sessions. So when you're thinking about agents, ask this question directly. What does your agent remember and across what time? If the answer involves your team loading context at the start of every session, that's not a true agent. The combo of adaptive reasoning and memory is what really separates a system that executes from a system that learns and gets better. Okay, that's where we are. So what does this look like today? What does this look like today? I've spent a lot of time talking about what to be skeptical of and what we need. But here's the before and after that I just saw with an organization. This was with a mid-sized company. They said they spend about 40% of their week in HR answering questions that already exist in the handbook, the quote-unquote handbook. What's the PTO policy? How do I update my benefits? When does open enrollment close? 40% of the time answering questions. Instead of doing what I call more strategic work, they're doing transactional work. We've all heard that before. They deploy an agent with good reasoning capability and some good memory architecture pointed at good data. The agent handles all of those questions, but guess what? The customer or the employee is satisfied. What does that team do with the additional 40% of the work? They do the work they were hired to do. That's strategic work. The human work that actually requires judgment and relationship and an understanding of the organization. The ones I've watched do this don't describe it as job replacement. They don't talk about it as job replacement. They talk about it as being able to do their actual job. Now, here's what happened before any of that was possible. The team spent 3 months validating their policy, finding the places where the written policy didn't match actual, resolving conflicts between the handbook and the manager guide, cleaning the data, deciding which questions were safe, which ones required a human. They did the human work first. The agent went live on a clean foundation, and it worked. That is what's so important. Get your data right. When that happens, guess what? These agents work. Now, really quickly, before you go into your next vendor conversation, which we're going to conferences, 5 quick things. Who built the path that it follows? 2, can it catch its own mistakes? 3, what does it remember and for how long? 4, what is the underlying process it's operating on? And when was it last validated against how that business runs today? And 5, can it explain every decision it made in plain language that a non-technical person can evaluate? 5 things. Who built the path? Can it catch its mistakes? Does it remember and for how long? What is the underlying process and when was it last validated? And can it explain every decision in actual plain language? Think of those things and then look at your agents and say, is this where we're at? This agent market is real. You're not going to stop hearing about it. You're not going to stop hearing CEOs say people are going to be replaced by agents. But before we can jump into this, we have to understand it. We have to understand that we're not just putting frosting on a cake that already was bad and calling it change. So be skeptical of what you're being shown because the label tells you almost nothing about what's in the box. Okay? I'm going to go back to the David bars that mislabeled the calories not long ago. The label tells you almost nothing what's in the box. Measure what matters, what actually matters, how much work moved from human to machine, and are you confident in those 5 questions we went through? An agent isn't an agent isn't an agent. I've said that a few times. The Swiss Army knife, a great tool, great to keep in your pocket, but it's not something we're going to let do surgery. I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed the listen. Any feedback is always appreciated. Subscribe. I'll talk to y'all soon. Take care.